welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today.
Oh.
That's right, because today we are talking about a book that you had pitched on Friends Pitching Fantasy a while back that we finally got around to reading. This is, of course, like the indie darling that turned into just a massive mainstream success and a fantastic debut from a, now up and coming, and now I would say he's up. He's up.
He's way up.
It's like the coming part is the up and coming. I don't know. It doesn't a little too short. He was at the time this book came out, and now he's everyone knows him and loves him. Then of course we're talking about Evan Winter and his debut novel, The Rage of Dragons.
Right, a book that started out self-published and then picked up a ton of steam on Reddit, R Fantasy, which we just did an episode for those folks.
Shout out.
A fantasy book recommendations episode right before this one. But yes, R Fantasy was a big part of Evan Winter's rise, and then eventually the book getting picked up by Orbit and then traditionally published, and that's the version that you and I just read. It is a phenomenal debut. I mean, one of the best debuts that I can remember reading. And
especially for like indie published too. It's so polished, and that just maybe when it was officially published. I don't know if there was an editing process there, but man, for a first book, especially coming up just independently, it is a huge accomplishment. It's really well written. I'm very shocked.
Right.
We read a lot of indie first books, and there's a lot to love out there, but I would never expect that kind of writing ability from a first-time author out there just for the fun of it, publishing it on their own. Well done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure the story exactly, if he was hoping to make this a career out of this, or if he was just doing it for fun, but he's certainly been able to carve a very successful authorial career. And yeah, he's got another book out, Fires of Vengeance, and I think working on the third,
The Lord of Demons.
People are the Lord of Demons.
Well, I'm seeing,
idea.
Did you know, Dylan, that in 2020, Time magazine named The Rage of Dragons one of the 100 best fantasy books of all time?
I did know that. That's impressive, and I think it definitely deserves a spot as one of the really innovative, unique, incredible stories that has come out relatively recently. I know that list is somewhat controversial in the sense that it leaves out some people that I think very much deserve to be there. There's no Joe Abercrombie, and that's just criminal. So anyway, don't want to take anything away from Evan Winter, but I know that list frustrates me a little bit with leaving off our buddy Joe and some others, I believe Mark Lawrence and all that. But this book certainly deserving of the praise that it's received, the accolades, and I'm super excited to get into it with you.
Yes, and I'm super excited to get into it too. Evan Winter has been on my radar to read for years and years and years. I knew his story. I knew that he was this indie darling that went, mainstream in a big way. And I've been dying to read into why that was the case. And then when you had pitched it, I was super excited to jump into it. And now here we are, finally talking about it. And I'm at a loss for where to kind of start. I guess the first thing is this book is commonly pitched as Game of Thrones meets Gladiator.
Yeah.
Which is
so Gladiator being the Russell Crowe vehicle.
Yeah.
If I'm
Are you not
right?
entertained? Yeah.
Yes. And a fantastic movie in its own right, although I haven't watched it, I think, since I was like a teenager, but
It's
definitely
been a long
enjoyed it
time.
a lot when I did watch it. I think, I mean, I guess we should do this part spoiler free still,
Sure,
Charles,
yeah.
or should I just
Up to you. I mean, you're the one that gives the famous.
I'm gonna give the
spoiler warnings.
I'm gonna give the spoiler warning because I think parts of that discussion are best had with spoilers. I'll just say I think it does hit that spot for Game of Thrones meets Gladiator as these kind of big picture pitches go. So if you're someone who hasn't yet read this book and that appeals to you, then I think it's a great book for you to check out. But
For sure.
for those of you who have read the book, we are going to get into a no holds barred conversation about the Rage of Dragons, and that means that it's going to have spoilers, and if you don't want to hear that, now's a good time to turn this down in your headphones. I will also mention we haven't yet read the second book, so we wouldn't even be able to spoil that, even if we wanted to. So you're safe here if you're like us and have only read The Rage of Dragons. But anyway, shall we get into this idea of Game of Thrones meets Gladiator? We've kind of had a few discussions on our podcast about these ways of pitching the book and how
Shout lines.
accurate it feels. Yeah, shout lines.
Because Kristen Cameron
And-
said once, a good shout line is short and is relatable to a popular like movie or something. So he would probably love
Right.
this shout line.
Yeah, I mean, I remember MJ Kuhn, who we interviewed, the author of Among Thieves. Hers was Game of Thrones meets Ocean's 11. So it's basically like, as long as you have some sort
Game of Thrones plus
like,
blockbuster movie.
Right, exactly. It
Equals
definitely
shout line.
seems like a good formula. Because I think there's these kind of like broad Game of Thrones meets insert your favorite movie that's similar in subgenre to your work that you kind of give to folks who aren't necessarily avid fantasy readers. So if you were to, for example, with MJ's work Among Thieves, if you were to compare it to The Lies of Locke Lamora, that's actually like a much better way of pitching it to someone who reads a ton of fantasy. But then, yeah, you've got, and I think there's several books I would point out are good comparisons for The Rage of Dragons as well. And maybe I'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, this Game of Thrones meets Gladiator idea, I think it's good because the revenge plot aspect of it, the kind of like, you noble people killed my family, and now I'm fighting and seeking revenge because of that, in addition to just the constant battling and the sword
like
fighting
the
and all
combat
that kind of
for
stuff.
entertainment piece.
Yes,
But also
yes,
it's also
that's a
like
good-
it's also like not so much entertainment, although there's
It's
people
training.
gambling and watching, but it's also
Yeah.
a contest that has stakes and like
There's actual meaning
Yeah.
to why they're doing the thing they're doing, and it just so happens it has turned into something of a spectacle, while for Gladiator, the spectacle was everything. The entertainment was the purpose. So, but yeah, I definitely see the comparisons, and then the Game of Thrones aspect, besides just being what people love to throw in as a way of getting people to be like, oh, you like the most popular show to come out in like the last decade? Well, you'll like this
2
too.
decades now.
So, yeah. So, oh God. We're getting old.
Yeah.
I just had my birthday, so it's a little much for me to hear that Game of Thrones was
premiered
not within the
when we
last
were in
decade
college,
anymore.
which was it? When did season 1 premiere? Who knows? Well,
I
anyway,
would say over a decade ago. But anyway, yes. Besides just being that, I think it's the whole like warring kingdoms. Not necessarily that the what they're warring against as a kingdom, but the warring giant factions also playing out, I think, is where the Game of Thrones comparisons come in. Not as sprawling, obviously, as Game of Thrones. It's super focused on Tao, which I know you and I have gotten more and more into stories like that lately that focus on a principal character and go for their development. So anyway, I think the comparison is apt. I could totally see more specific recommendations within the fantasy novel community that I would suggest. But yeah, if you're pitching this to someone who's not a huge reader, I think that's a great way to pitch it. What do you think, Charles?
Yeah, it gets the point across. I don't really see much, it's so far down its own path. It's swords and sorcery, and there's dragons, and there's politics, but not to the same extent. It's not written similarly to Game of Thrones. And for the record, the first episode of Game of Thrones aired on April 17th, 2011, so it has been well over 10 years. So yeah, we are old. So over a decade now. But that I get it, because there's a lot in this story that was super exciting and also surprising and shocking. So it does deliver on a lot of that from the Game of Thrones experience. But what I like about it, and what you mentioned and what we knew going into it when we did the research, was that Evan Winter was able to focus this story onto one character's POV for the most part. There's there's an intro, what do they call it, a prologue, where we're fantasy.
We've only done over 200 episodes.
Call it a prologue. There's a prologue. And
there's also a brief moment,
there's
where
brief
you get the perspective of one of his enemies, and you realize Tao's a freaking monster.
Yes,
but
some of the ones where you're in the enemies are kind of funny. I also believe there was one where we get the POV, and I may be wrong about this, but Jayed, did we get a POV from him briefly at one point? Maybe
I don't think so, okay. But I am thinking now we did get Kellen.
Okay,
we get Kellen to see the perspective that Kellen was like, "Oh yeah, I really didn't want to kill Tao's dad. That's why I cut off his hand." And you remember that?
Yes.
Although we do get that explained later, but we do get his perspective. It's kind of the Kellen's not such a bad guy chapter.
Right. And I think that's good to know. And we could talk about the whole revenge plot as we go along.
Yeah.
As we get further into the plot of the book, because I think that's an interesting distinction to make, as Tao's getting his revenge on people, and the reason why he wants revenge, and the reason why he wants revenge on certain people. But I do want to just quickly end cap the discussion around being focused predominantly on Tao. To me, because there's a lot going on, right? This magic system's pretty unique, and there's a lot to unfold about it. There's a lot of world here, and the book is fairly short. A Game of Thrones can be 1,000+ pages long, right. And we were reading Stormlight Archive, which you could fit 4 of these into a Stormlight Archive book. So, I personally was really enjoying it, and it helps me really kind of follow along and enjoy the story. And it takes away some of the more, I'm going to say, oppressive parts of world building, where it's you feel like you have to track people and where we're going and what's happening. I never had that issue with this book. Maybe a little bit in the intro, because you are just kind of jumping into this conflict. But once we got into Tao and Tao's story kind of took off, I was like, oh, okay, I'm with this 100% of the way, the full way. And it just added to the enjoyment of it, because this book has a lot of exciting action pieces that are the focus for a while, and I love that in this book. I don't think Game of Thrones, there's some exciting fights and things, but there's more going on with the politicking and the dialogue of the characters. I think this is much more action adventure that I really liked, and I think keeping it focused to one character allowed us to get like see the complexities of the culture and the politics, but also have time for the action as well, and keep it compact and keep that reading experience like really solid. So I thought the creative direction to keep it pretty much Tao focused was really good, and I think it added to my overall enjoyment. Like I loved it.
For sure, Charles. I think that I pitched it way back just based on what I was reading from other people's like reviews and stuff, and everyone said, hey, yeah, there's actually great world building and a great magic system and like an interesting exploration of oppression and a caste system and all of this kind of stuff. But what is so incredible about it is all of those serve the character arc of Tao, our main character. And I loved that idea when I was reading about it. And I was like, let's see how this execution actually works. And Evan Winter absolutely nailed it. It's like we care about the caste system because Tao is a victim of this caste system and it affects him and his story. Because I think it's like I can't speak for other people, but just my way of reading it, and I know yours too, Charles. We're not into world building for world building's sake for the most part. We're into world building as it serves the character foremost and the plot as well. And it's like I found myself super invested in these ideas presented in the world building, like the caste system, for example, because of how they impact the character, because it humanizes all of these things in a way that is going to make you empathize as a fellow human. And I love how Evan Winter was able to do what feels like a pretty massive amount of world building to present a totally unique setting and one that we don't get to see enough in fantasy, and do it all without it ever feeling like he's info dumping or just doing exposition for its own sake. So,
it's definitely a skill. It's this interesting balance of like being super creative and fleshing out this world, but also being very conscious of how you disseminate that information to the reader and always being conscious of the reading experience. And, you know, I found out Evan Winter has a lot of like filmmaking experience. And like, so that makes so much sense to me because there's so much like in movies, you have an hour and a half, you know, almost 3 hours these days.
Not any. I know. Yeah, good luck finding an hour and a half movie these days, Charles.
So you got a 3-hour movie, right? And there's a lot of these, like, you have to be very careful about how you keep the story moving. And a lot of the best movies do a very good job of, we could call it show over tell, but I think it's a little bit more next level than that. I think it's like set up and payoff and keeping it relevant to the character arc and the story. And I want to get into setup and payoffs throughout this whole book because it's so brilliant. And when I realized after reading it that this guy had experience, that Evan Winter had experience in film, it makes so much sense because you get so many things that he's training us to remember and recognize that he has payoff shortly afterwards in a different way. And it's super interesting to watch the writing process. And that's why when it's like an indie author, that's such a rare thing. I think so many first-time authors, whether they're indie or not, get so excited by their world and feel the need to explain it so much that you can kind of lose some of that. But we never lose sight of Tao, the character, and anything that we are introduced is introduced in a way that serves his character. The only times I felt like, okay, we're dragging a little bit are when Tao and Zori are just hanging out and Zori's explaining the magic system for long periods of time. But you're like, okay, like, I'm not going to complain about that. Like, we need to know.
But also, I mean, also, Tao is trying to learn about the magic system for a very specific reason that has to do with his main motivation for the story.
And then he goes on and uses that knowledge.
Right. It's not like one of those as you know type expositions, right? Where it's like, why are these two characters talking about this thing that clearly they both know? It's because they're communicating that to the reader.
Has the
Tao
training,
doesn't, yes,
and is able
and
to
Tao,
send people to Isioko and all of that. And Tao is desperately trying to understand, because how many times has he been thrown into the underworld by a gifted? Like, even at the very beginning of the story, when his village was raided, he was attacked by a gifted, and so this has been part of his past and his trauma and him trying to fight it. He's like, well, if I'm going to be the best, I have to be able to overcome this impossible thing, which is get over being in the underworld and being attacked by demons. And how do I do that? So is very attentive and very much quizzing her and trying to understand what's going on. So, and then he ends up using that knowledge in the next, scene, and you're with it the whole time. So even at his most expo dumpy, it's all within these parameters.
Expo dumpy. You just made like a portmanteau of exposition and info dump.
Yeah. At his most
it's
expo
the spork,
dumpy.
Right? It's the spork of exposition and info dumping. So. See. Yeah, that's beautiful, Charles.
Thank you.
As you were saying, when Evan Winter is going to give you some sort of, and I mean, it is exposition, but it's not unrealistic. It's exactly the conversation that those characters would be having, and like I said before, it serves the character's motivation.
Right.
So
it's in the dialogue.
I don't have
any
issue.
Scene, right? Like the scene is, I'm meeting you after training, after just almost losing because we couldn't fight this gifted, and I need to understand. And then he like latches onto information, and I love all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But like it all starts at the beginning, and I think we can kind of touch on some of these plot points from the beginning. Like not too much to say about the prologue for me, and honestly the beginning to me, this really kicks off when Tao is like gets the two swords and is like learning how to fight and is past all of this stuff. That's like my favorite stuff. But the beginning is still very good, and it sets the pace right away. There's a lot of familiar themes in the beginning of this book, like we've seen many times where a lower class is treated unfairly by the upper class, right? So you kind of get that moment of the injustice of this class system. Even before Tao's dad is killed, you get these moments where there was like a rape from a noble to a lesser, and like they tried to get the lesser off, but then the noble just goes and kills them anyway, and that's
they get they get banished,
right
they get banished for being the victims in the situation. And then the noble, like petty noble Jabari's brother ends up getting them killed anyway. So you're getting a sense of the injustice and the oppression and all of that. I agree with you. It definitely picks up once Tao is training and fighting.
Sure. I do like the moment where Tao confronts, and I'm forgetting his name right now, but one of those nobles, and that's when he gets the eye injury.
One of them noble folks.
One of them noble folks. But when he gets the eye injury, he sneaks into the bedroom with the knife and is like, I'm not going to kill you today, but you better watch it, and I'm going to come for you. It kind of speaks to his naivete, and also to like how far he has had to come as a soldier, right? As a weapon of, he couldn't even get the one up on this like spoiled noble, essentially. That's how far of a disadvantage he was at, right? And he ends up killing him anyway, but it's like that plan was horrible. And it's like obviously the plan of a child in the middle of grief, well, not necessarily a child, but a youth, obviously distraught with grief, not even fully processing it, thinking he's just going to be like, I'm going to kill you one day, and think he can get away with it, So that was a fun moment. But what it does launch us to is like Tao's drive for revenge. And that is my favorite thing about this book and about this character, is the drive for revenge and the lengths that Tao will go to become stronger. I love that about this story. Like again, we talked about setups and payoffs. Like there was this conversation between Tao and Jayed, right? Who's the head of the scale, who recruited Tao. And he's like, I'm choosing you not because you won, but because of your drive. You never stayed down. You kept getting up. And he's like, you need to give me everything. And if you want to be good, like, you need to give me all of your time. That's what you're paying for. That is the setup to essentially him going into and training in Isiogo, because he's like, I need more time, and time moves 50 times slower here. And
you can die over and over again.
Yeah, you can die over and over again.
And your enemies are very powerful and all that kind of stuff. So it's this perfect setup for him.
Right.
You seem like I have more to say, but Charles, you seem like you got more on it. So
no, but I was just saying like that, like which the time from them having that conversation to him training in Isiogo, which I never saw coming, but loved the idea instantly of him doing that, because it's absolutely insane. And you're just literally getting mauled horrifically over and over by
it's
literal
like my favorite
demons.
Concept. It's like my favorite concept in this entire book is that he would just go to Isiogo and just die over and over and over. Like, it's one of the most believable ways to do this. Like, we take obviously Tao's not exactly just the like farm boy from the typical, but it is this kind of like humble beginnings farm shepherd from the Two Rivers, like Wheel of Time, like that kind of humble beginning, which has become such a mainstay in fantasy, and to actually level them up in a way that is believable, like this is like it's unique and incredible. The only thing I could compare it to, Charles, which is what I could not get out of my head, is you remember the the World of Warcraft episode of South Park?
Yes, where they just train in like the lobby and kill like 100.
Well, yeah, what they do is like, so there's this guy who's like going around killing everyone, right? If I'm remembering correctly, and he's ridiculously powerful and all that kind of stuff, and they want to be able to fight against him. So the kids, Stan and the gang, they just take their characters and they like retreat into a forest and just fight these like really low level boars, but do it for so long that they get powerful enough.
Any of the missions or quests, the guy would find them and kill them. And it's not Stan and the gang, by the way. Stan came later. Stan's the dad.
Stan came later.
Yeah, he went to the World of War. Oh wait,
Randy is the dad.
Randy's the dad. I stand corrected. Which
embarrassing one is... yourself.
Oh no, you're right.
I
stand corrected. I don't know why I confused Stan with Randy, but because if they would go in, he would find them and kill them. So they had to train where he couldn't get to them. But the only enemies that were there were like level 1, barely any XP.
It's not like a challenge to fight them either. It's just like mashing the button to kill them over and over again.
Yeah, this is like that's the basically of that.
Yeah, but the idea of just like going somewhere and just like grinding, like doing
it is basically
just straight up grinding forever.
Right.
I respect it.
Yeah. The power scaling, I think, is something that is super well done, because it can be almost a double-edged sword, if you will, for authors, where it's like, I need my main character to be... Oh, stop it.
You're better than that.
That was
It's
funny.
not even a double-edged sword. There's two swords. It's not one double-edged sword. It's
two double-edged.
You're better than that.
I was close enough that someone out there chuckled, okay? I don't need to get this from you.
It's a small percentage of our listenership that chuckled.
If just one.
You might have gotten that nose exhale someone does when they're alone.
I'll take it. That's a win. But
and they're laughing.
I'm trying to talk about the power scaling, and I'm trying to bring it back from the beginning where he was struggling.
Power scaling.
Oh, see?
Because of scale.
Yeah, exactly.
Now that's
scales.
That's not good either. But
it's he's Tao
in
the scale.
The bar for you
in Jayed's scale.
Sure, the bar for you is lower.
But it can be double-edged for authors because you have to have your character have humble beginnings, but he also, or she, the character, also has to overcome immense odds and beat all their, like, how do you do that, right? And in a way that feels earned and realistic. Like, Harry Potter could be an example where it's like, oh, his first year he killed Voldemort. It's like, how did he do that? Like, he's a kid with barely
he
any
killed
magical
Voldemort
training.
when he was a baby.
Yeah, exactly. So, and even where it's like in the example of the tryouts, to even be a part of one of the scales, you have to win a bunch of matches, and it's like Tao is like, well, obviously Tao needs to be in one of these things, and that would mean he would have to win a bunch of matches, but I don't want him to be that good yet. That's
Right.
kind of the balance that he's facing, and he fights Udawak. I love Udawak. He's one of my favorite characters, and that's a great name for the kind of character that he is. Just a berserker with a giant sword. And they just
brick wall.
Just wailing on people, whacking them. And he loses, which normally would mean he's eliminated. But he was able to catch the Eye of Jayed and get brought in, and he had his arm broken, and so he was just losing all the time. And that's when he learned to develop, a dual wielding kind of fighting style. So it's all worked into it. And I think Evan Winter, I would love to ask him this, but I can tell that he spent a lot of time considering the power scaling of his main character, right? Because this whole book is pretty much about how he becomes this scary, strong fighter and how he kind of loses his sense of self a little bit in the pursuit of being the most powerful fighter, and like to the point where he may actually overcome some of these odds of like fighting just genetically superior, that's what they want you to believe, nobles, right? So how can I get to that? And the lengths that he has Tao go through and the defeats that he has Tao go through while still being able to be a part of the scale and the team and becoming more powerful is one of my favorite parts about this whole book. And then that unlock. See, you thought about South Park. I thought about the hyperbolic time chamber in Dragon Ball Z. Where they need to fight Cell, but he's so strong, but time moves slower in the hyperbolic time chamber, so they go in there and they get super buff. But the hyperbolic time chamber was like, oh, it's just a place where it gives you everything you need to keep you comfortable so you can train. This is like the hyperbolic time chamber, but if it was instead of a paradise that will give you anything you need, it's the upside down, basically. So it's like the hyperbolic time chamber that takes you, but you have to go, but it's the upside down. And you're like, oh God, that's the kind of hellscape that Evan Winter created for Tao to train in, and it's so good. And I just love this idea of him like in bed being like, well, I got to give my time to this. I need more time. This place moves 50 times slower. This is where I'm going. And just spends his nights torturing himself and getting himself killed in painfully horrific ways, basically getting clawed, eaten alive almost, pretty much on repeat over and over. But the end result, like that final power scaling of this, where he's fighting like enraged people and he's doing this and that, it's super impressive and it feels earned. And those moments at the end just feel so epic and rewarding. Yeah,
for sure. You touched on a couple really important things there. One of which you mentioned the idea of Evan Winter clearly planning out this sort of setup payoff idea. And I did watch an interview with that Daniel Green conducted with Evan Winter. Daniel Green, YouTube extraordinary. If you're listening to us, you probably know of him. And this was years ago, but my memory of it is that he is fastidious with his planning and his just outlining.
I could tell.
They talk about the idea of pantsers, people that write by the seat of their pants, versus these outliners. And Evan Winter, absolutely an outliner from my memory of it. And you can tell it because he makes sure, as you're saying, everything feels earned. He makes sure, I want Tao to fight amazingly with two swords. And it's like, well, why would he fight with two swords when there's like, this is not the way people are trained and no one else is fighting with two swords. And he's like, okay, well, what if he broke his arm and he had to fight with the other arm, and then he ends up just instinctively grabbing another sword, and it's like, okay, I'm
right,
buying
he
into
broke
all this
his dominant hand,
lesser,
so he had to fight with
Right.
his non-dominant hand while his
Right.
dominant hand healed.
Yes. So I'm thinking that, no pun intended, a lesser author would. You like that one, Charles?
Yeah, I do like it. I support it.
Yeah. So
I ship it,
Yeah,
as
a
the
less-
kids say.
is that what they say? So a lesser author, though, would just be like, oh, I want my guy to be a badass fighting with two swords. So then they just are.
Right.
Or they just decide, oh, I'm going to be a two-sword guy. And
Right.
it's like...
So easy to say, oh, his dad was a weapons master, so I'm a weapons master, and like
right.
that. Yeah, and he didn't go that route. He
did not.
Tao had to earn it, boy.
Oh, he did, and it's because of that relentlessness in the pursuit of revenge, which is, I think, that character motivation is arguably the most important thing for getting a reader invested in your story. I don't know what would be more important than character motivation. And we have that. It's very clear what his motivation is. It's very justified why he would be motivated in that way. And his relentless pursuit of that is super interesting. And it reminds me of some of my other favorite characters, like Rin from the Poppy War is one that I definitely had coming up for me, which is like, she's defined by that sort of relentless pursuit of her goals, and not necessarily with the same like natural strength as some other people, which of course is something that Tao deals with, because the nobles are literally just physically larger and more gifted in those ways because of presumably like centuries of eugenics that have made them just like look
and nutrition
and they
all this other stuff
that I'm sure contributes as well. And then it's like you can look at someone and determine like with some generality like where they're going to fall in the caste system here. So Tao just has all these things working against him, and what's incredible about Evan Winter's writing is that he's able to help Tao overcome that, make him just an absolute juggernaut killing machine, and we never doubt it for a second.
Yeah, and then those are rare moments when we go outside his perspective to see how far he's come and like how much he stands out by the end. Like we take the POV of an enraged at one point and towards the end, and she's like, super powerful, and it goes through her whole backstory about how she's like always been strong, and then all of a sudden she's like, oh, there's that lesser over there with two swords. How odd that he would have two swords. It's like, oh, he's getting a little closer. Well, it's a shame that there's like 12 people surrounding him, so whatever. And it's like, oh, he's like coming towards me, okay. And then like she starts to get scared, and she retreats. And that is like, whoa, okay, like and it feels earned, and it doesn't feel like, oh, your powers are unlocked and now you can kill anyone all of a sudden. It's like, no, we know what Tao's been through. He's like fought in the underworld for forever. He's kind of like transcended a bit from some of these other fighters, and he's able to take on Enrage. And then he takes on an Enrage at the end of the book. And so like we've been kind of trained and prepared for these. Again, we talk about the setups and payoffs. It's like we know how the Enrage works, and he's able to actually defeat one at the end of the book. And that's like one of the climactic battles at the end, is how he uses, one, his knowledge of how the magic system works, and two, like his previous confrontations with Enraged and what we know about Enraged made it shine through, and that was a fun battle at the end. And it's always about like getting the power balance correct, getting the stakes correct, and scaling his power correctly. And I could just tell that he's a plotter and an outliner, because I can just see the amount of thought and detail that went into all of these moments to make them feel earned, and like get him to feel like he's like a flippin' Super Saiyan out there compared to everyone else, because of all the battles that he's gone through to get to that point, like brought to death and back hundreds of times. It was a really cool thing to see unfold for Tao. And then you combine it with the fact that he's a lesser in a super classist society. Like at the end, he doesn't even bow to the queen, right? And it's like, bow, Tao. And he's like, no, like I just killed an enraged, like I'm not bowing to anybody, you know, like, and the queen was like, that's fair, you know, props. and you're like,
well, who's gonna stop him?
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like at that point he gets to, who's gonna stop me? And it's super interesting that you compared him to Vin. I think that's such a great comparison. Rin. Yes, the
Vin
one from Poppy
Mistborn.
Wars. The Poppy Wars one. Yes. I meant the Poppy Wars.
It ain't
one.
easy. It ain't easy.
Because there's also this cautionary tale in the pursuit of revenge and the pursuit of power, right? I'm not going to get into spoilers for the Poppy War, but one of the main themes is she's so dogmatically pursuing power that she's kind of sacrificing herself, right? And at the beginning of this book, it's the same thing. It's like, you need to give me your time. Any thoughts of having a life like are gone and belong to training. And we know Tao, which I mad respect, by the way. At the beginning, Tao's like, I could just not fight and like get injured and walk away from the whole thing. It's like, what a reasonable idea to have that I'm sure I would have if I was a protagonist. I'd be a very boring one. I'd be like, or I could just not, go home and watch TV instead, right? Like the fact that was an option until it was taken away from him, right? Like, so this idea of like, he still has Zuri, right? And they still meet, and he still like wants to have a life with her, and he has his friendships along the way that he's making, but like he's paying that cost, and there's some things that he won't let go, and it's super interesting. And that's when like Zuri's death at the end is like, okay, there's nothing keeping this guy tethered to his life anymore. It's the last thread. Yes.
Right. That's connecting him to any humanity or any sense that he might be a normal functioning person in this society.
Right.
And it just makes him a revenge incarnate, right? And because he still has one more person to kill. And I think, it's interesting the way that I really like how Evan Winter writes the relationship between him and Zuri. Mm-hmm. There's no melodramatic elements of it. Like there's parts where she gets kind of mad at him, but it's also
but she's also like emotionally mature and like knows how to like bring him in anyway, and like take a little bit more initiative in their relationship and stuff.
They're clear about their feelings.
Yeah, they're clear about
clear about their feelings to each other in a way that is rare among fantasy protagonists and their love interests.
Mm-hmm.
So I applaud Evan Winter for writing it that way. And also Tao, as he's dealing with Zuri, it's interesting the way that his priorities kind of come out by accident. Like it'll be moments where he's thinking like he's about to say like, oh, you're almost the most important thing in the world to me, and like that's because the most important thing in the world to him is training and getting better. He said something like, I love you
almost as much as fighting or something.
As fighting.
Yeah, he's like, I really like fighting.
No, I think it's not I think he says I think about you all the time. Like, I think about you almost as much as training or something like that.
Right. Which to him, it was a genuine compliment. But to her, it's like, you realize you just said you like fighting more than me. You know, like.
Well, think about.
Yeah.
I think.
Fun. But she knew.
And
but
there's
she
other
him,
moments like that.
It's an endearing moment. It's funny. And for Tao, it's so true, because when he's not with her, he's just so absorbed with training. And you know that he's thinking about training all the time. So. Like, it's just funny.
It's true to the character. I think it's really there's no real opportunity for us to do this on the air, I don't think, but it's really interesting to compare and contrast the Zuri and Tao relationship with Quoth and Denna relationship.
Oh boy!
By the way,
Somehow
I'm not gonna
Denna
get into it. No, you can't tell me you didn't think about it at all.
I really didn't, but it is interesting. Yeah.
I mean, well,
I feel like Zuri
I can't really get into
Tao
it too
are
much.
a lot more straightforward.
Well, that's part of the contrasting.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's interesting. I won't get into it. Maybe we'll talk about it off the air at some point, Charles. But
sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of differences.
Killer Chronicle
I
fans
love
out there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sorry. King Killer Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss is what I'm talking about. If you haven't read that one, and that's one of my favorite romantic relationships, if you want to call it that, in fantasy. But I think it's written very differently from this one, and this one is written in a way that the characters act a lot more maturely than the ones in the King Killer Chronicle. But I think that it's so, I mean, Wheel of Time, I won't get into the specifics of which characters, but there's the way that the romantic relationships are written in that is very like, why don't people just like tell each other how they feel about each other? It's like, I remember there's a character that in one of the books just like asked their love interest like if they could kiss them at some point in Wheel of Time. And I was like, oh my god, like this is like book 3 or 4 or whatever. And finally a character like was clear that they had feelings for another character. Right. And it was such a relief. And then in this book, like, yeah, there's a little of like Zuri holding back when you can tell she wants to say I love you. But I don't know. I think that's pretty normal, and the development of the relationship is like that kind of stuff happens all the time in the real world. And then, yeah, finally she does say I love you, and I was like, oh, she's cooked. And then I was like, that is more accurate than I meant it to be.
Yeah, well, yeah, unfortunately. But it was funny because, like, again, talking about the setup and payoffs, that moment was set up too, because right before that, they were fighting a gifted who was trapped in Isiogo because their elevated wouldn't let them go, and you saw how the death was possible and how it played out. And then that was literally moments before we see something very similar happening with Zuri, and we know the stakes, and we're like, oh my gosh, if she doesn't disconnect from this dragon, she's gonna like shoot blood out of her face and stuff. Like, it's gonna be a not happy ending at all. And that talking about like the burning bright and all this other stuff. And then they also mentioned drawing power from Isiogo, like all that stuff that has been set up. And I knew from the beginning when Zuri was like, never take power from Isiogo, I was like, oh, this dude's taking power from Isiogo. Like,
right.
Like, definitely. And he does, but he does it when she's doing something she's not supposed to do. Like by holding on to the dragon. And it was like a really nice, like she sacrificed herself basically in a way that we were able to understand and honestly think that she could get out of. Like there were moments in those stakes where it's like she could survive. And then ultimately it was this sacrifice that she went out on. And you're like, oh my God, he actually went there. You know, and that to me is really just a testament to Evan Winter's writing ability. When you can create those stakes, and there is that, I honestly don't know. It could go either way, like what is going to happen in this very intense moment. And yeah, it was in a way that kind of portrayed Zuri as this final moment of compassion, basically, to sacrifice herself to save the others. And it's also the last thread that Tao had to any kind of reality. So it's interesting to see when the book ends, he's just like sitting there, like looking out the window and not saying anything. And you're like, oh my God, this guy is like next level dangerous. So love all that.
I mean, he was already just seeing the demons everywhere.
Right.
As he's just going about his day-to-day life, which was also very
there were times, again, talking about the, like in that moment where like the person he was trying to get revenge on is like right there. And he's like, finally. And then his friend Jabari is like, Tao, I'm losing my battle. And he's like, God, like there's like that moment of like, what do I do? You know, do I protect this noble who was my friend at one point, or do I get my revenge, everything I've sacrificed for right here, right now, you know? And he does make the choice to save Jabari, which there's still a little bit of that. And you could tell he gets tested a few times like that, where he had the moment to drop everything and get his revenge, but it meant leaving his friends or doing the right thing. It meant doing the wrong thing, basically, leaving his friends to suffer. So it is kind of still there. And
that was before Zuri.
Yeah, that was before Zuri. Yes. This was all before Zuri was killed. So it leaves that question mark, right? Of like, is he completely gone, or is there like, you know, what does this mean to get revenge? And keep in mind, another thing that I like about it is one of those characters like didn't even really want to kill Tao's dad. He cut the hand off as a way to try and de-escalate it as best as he could. And remember, we saw from the beginning how to de-escalate usually means like, we'll just banish them. We won't kill them. It's like, I'll just chop your hand off. I won't kill you. It's still a pretty raw deal. But that's how they kind of are like, look, this in our society, I'm trying to throw you a bone here. Like, I just cut his hand off. You know, like, he still could have survived if you hadn't
position that, that's Kellen. The position that he'd been put in, that really was the best shot of getting Tao's dad out alive. I mean, I think so anyway. And then we get this kind of, I like the redemption arc of Kellen here. It's pretty understated compared to some redemption arcs. I think that is purposeful. I think Evan Winter just is not about the melodramatic. He wants his drama to come from the real moments of drama, and he doesn't want to distract from it by having every single thing become this big dramatic moment.
Right.
And he kind of like redeems Kellen through like, we get to see his point of view and understand where he was coming from. And then we see him in action and the choices that he's making in these critical moments toward the end of the book. They're in line with someone who's a pretty noble, reasonable person. And it's like, that's cool. And I really like that because it lets us keep our attention on Tao and his story. And it allows for those moments to really hit well because Evan Winter has restraint in when he's making these big dramatic moments.
For sure. And like when you're writing a revenge story, I think it's really nice to have a little bit more of that conflicting, like it's almost like Tao becomes the bad guy in a way, you know, like he's so focused on seeking revenge that he's actually like being the thing he sought to destroy, you know, that kind of warning,
which is a classic revenge story. I think element, or at least when people try to subvert the revenge story somewhat. There's another revenge. I don't know if it's spoiler if I even mention the name of the book now, but there's another revenge story that this reminds me of in some ways. I'm just gonna say it. Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie.
No spoiler, I think
there's
a
lot of
story.
Similar. There's just similar themes. I think I won't get into any plot details.
You know, have you seen the movie Pig with Nicolas Cage?
No.
It's a great...
Did you mean Babe?
No, I meant Pig. I'm looking for my truffle pig. You know, it's a great movie. Fantastic revenge story.
Are you sure this wasn't like a dream you had at some point? No, this of like Nicolas Cage in a movie called Pig?
It's actually a rare modern Nick Cage movie that's good. And it's a great movie about revenge and seeking revenge and...
a truffle hunter who lives alone in the Oregon wilderness must return to his past in Portland in search of his beloved foraging pig after she is kidnapped. Is this like a knockoff of John Wick?
It's way... I loved the movie, but
like, you watch the trailer. Better than John Wick?
I do like it better than John Wick is fun, but it's like people getting shot. You know, it's cool. It's an action movie. It's fun, but Pig makes you think.
Nick Cage is such a mixed bag. These
I
movies
know,
where it's like,
I know.
what is he
Most
doing? Like,
movies
this
are
is
bad,
terrible.
but that
and then
one
there's
is
random
good.
ones where he's like,
and
really good.
They pick him on purpose, and it's a great pick. And we could talk about it someday. But the trailer's hilarious. It's just like, I'm looking for my truffle pig. It's like great line. It's a good movie, and I have a lot to say about like why they cast Nicolas Cage and why it's a good like revenge story, or like, you know, I'm trying to find who took my pig. You know, like I'm trying to like get justice, and it's super good. But anyway, it kind of reminds me of that, because there's this whole, you could take it a bunch of ways. You could take it like, I overthrew this big bad and prevailed, or like I'm a little bit lost in the revenge sauce and going a little crazy, and we get a little bit of both. We get a little bit of both in this one, and I think Evan Winter's trying really hard to get a more rounded experience for Tao. So like, I think this is a trilogy, right? It's planned to be a trilogy. So
it might even be planned, don't quote me on this, but I feel like I heard somewhere it might be 4
Orbit
books.
Books re-released The Rage of Dragons and signed Winter to a 4-book deal. Okay.
A quartet?
A quartet.
Which I only know because of Robert V.S. Reddick's
Yeah.
The Catherine Voyage Quartet.
That's right.
4 books.
So
a rare thing in fantasy.
Very rare, but it's interesting. You know, you kind of avoid the second book slump a little bit when you gotta, like, when there is no middle.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah.
Or you have a 2-book long.
But like, there's a long way for Tao to go, so it seems like there's going to be a lot more dimensions here than we might.
Oh well, I trust Evan Winter after reading this one.
Oh yeah,
he's
yeah.
Gonna deliver.
He's considered it all already for sure. Like it's all plotted already, and like, I'm excited to read the second book and to see where it goes. The Fires of Vengeance, already kind of telling, like, you see, like that could mean both a positive thing, like he's fiery and he's powerful, or it could be like vengeance will burn you up and destroy you, right? So it's got that kind of double meaning there, that like Tao's kind of battling on both sides of his revenge arc right now with. So very interesting.
Yeah. I'm interested to see if he sticks as closely to Tao in the next book, or if he starts to expand the
live up to the Game of Thrones comparison a bit more by like blowing this thing out.
Right.
Tao gets immediately killed in the beginning of the next book.
It's going to be a challenge, and I trust that Evan Winter will succeed in approaching this challenge. But it's going to be a challenge if, especially if he sticks to Tao extremely closely, that if someone loses their humanity entirely, it becomes very hard for the reader to empathize and be as invested in their plight. And I think that, like, that's why these characters, like, you think of these characters that are extremely, like, revenge focused, or like do all these horrible things. They always try to have like a spark of what makes them human, right? And I feel like we lost that with Zuri, and I don't see any easy replacement for that. And I don't know.
I mean,
it's
the
gonna.
Queen, maybe.
It's like, if his humanity. So yeah, we'll see. Like, he'll have to do a lot of developing the Queen. Then I think that it's like a big conflict that we're grappling with in The Rage of Dragons is like, will Tao lose his humanity? Like, will he be able to maintain a sense of who he is and what he cares about and values when he's so focused on revenge?
Totally.
And it's like, well, it feels like he ended this like all in on revenge and pretty damaged, and like we said, the last thread has been snapped. I don't know. It's going to be a challenge. I'm interested to see how Evan Winter is able to, like, either maintain that conflict or get us invested in a different conflict in order to maintain the interest that we had in The Rage of Dragons.
Yeah, and I mean, he starts to expand the world a little bit. We got the Civil War kind of thing going on from a political standpoint. So and Tao's kind of taking that commanding role. Like, for the main reason he says it was to kill Abasi Odili, but he is assuming a lot of responsibility, and maybe he'll be won over by his comrades and his queen and get a little bit of national...
He does care about, his sword brothers.
Yeah.
I think that he cared. He took it pretty hard when Jayed died.
Yeah.
That was... I think that was another moment of kind of like, no matter how strong I get, I still can't protect everyone.
Yeah,
sort of
that
thing.
was a big
I'll
one.
still lose people that I love no matter how strong I get. And, Jayed's kind of the appetizer, and then the main course is Zuri.
Absolutely. Again, the setup idea.
And, also playing off Zuri got cooked.
She, but not before experiencing some pretty gnarly stuff in Isioko. No, I agree, and it's again like the pursuit of becoming this powerful tool, because that's the other thing. Like, revenge is one piece of it, but it's also like giving yourself up to being as powerful as you need to be to protect people. Like just the pursuit of that, you're losing people anyway. And you're like losing these moments of being able to spend time with Zuri and being able to train with your sword brothers and this and that, just in the wholehearted pursuit. And even Jayed kind of pedals back a little bit from like, he was like, you need to give me all of your time, to being like, no one actually gives all their time, Tao. That's insane. Like, they have that conversation a little later on, and Tao's like, what are you talking about? You're the one that told me to do this. And he's like, I didn't think you're like go that hard, like you're going too far, and I'm the guy that told you to give all your time, and I'm saying you're giving too much time. And that is,
it's like he's used to normal people that if you say you gotta give all your time, they'll find maybe they'll work harder and they'll find some middle ground, and then it's like, oh no, you're not supposed to actually literally do the thing I said. It's more to push you in the right direction.
100%. And that was an interesting moment too, because I feel like there's two separate tracks. Like, there's the pursuit of revenge and there's the pursuit of like power. And like, he tells himself it's to protect people, but you kind of see a little bit that may not be as strong of a motivation as he thinks. And it's more like, I don't know, because to me it's like, yes, his father was killed, and that's, can be a big motivator for Tao, and certainly it is, but there's these moments where like it's kind of beyond any of that, and this guy just loves to fight and loves to be strong, get stronger, and loves to train. And a lot of that, yes, comes from wanting to like beat nobles and stuff, but you can also tell he's like obsessed with it beyond that. And there's like a how it almost kind of deteriorates the whole reason he was doing it in the first place. Like, he forgets totally, like, his father's memory is not brought up that much. He doesn't talk about his dad like at all. And so it's interesting to see, like, is that his motivation? It's hard to even tell. Are we going to get this moment where, like, I don't want to spoil Breaking Bad, but kind of like that, where it's just like, oh, I had cancer, so I sold drugs, and oopsie daisies, I'm a drug lord. Where he's like, no, it was cool as heck, and I liked being powerful. There's a little bit of that.
Oh, for sure. And there's this quote, and I think I mentioned it actually in our Poppy War episodes, or maybe it was when we were on Phantology podcast as a feature on The Burning God, which is one of the Poppy War trilogy books. There's this quote that is always attributed just as an African proverb. I've never seen who actually said it. But it's, the child who's not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And I think that there's this part of Tao where he represents someone who's just been beaten down so heavily in this society by this caste system that he's looking for reasons, and revenge is one, and protecting the people around him is another. But really, he just is like has been rendered so powerless that now he is kind of pursuing power for its own sake and become this kind of force of destruction. And I think he's not like a bad person inherently, so he wants reasons that are justifiable as to why he's doing the things that he's doing. I think they do play a role, of course, as to why he's doing the things he's doing. But sometimes I think it does go beyond that, like you're saying, Charles, and it's is fighting for the sake of like gaining power, and it's doing that to burn down the things around him,
right?
And
and that's kind of paralleled with like the upper class, right? It's like the pursuit of power is so prevalent. It's when you find out that the dragon is just like held hostage, it's like we pursued power so badly, like 100 and in the prologue, where it's like, yeah, we could have had peace and we could have coexisted, but instead we're the chosen, and we're gonna burn your village, we're gonna burn your army to ashes with a dragon that we forcibly we captured the baby dragon to force the other dragons to cooperate, like having a dragon hostage. And like there's something to be said about the pursuit of power in that too, and it's kind of interesting how Tao is now in a position of actual power as well as being powerful, so we'll see how he kind of copes with being part of the system that he trained to destroy, right?
Well, I do think he wants to burn it down.
Oh yeah, and for sure.
I think that's that's where this is likely to head.
But he's seeing kind
burning
of
it down.
There's so much hypocrisy in the existing power too, that you almost wonder like the pursuit of power itself is inherently like going to create these bad, like is going to kind of take away from your life and cause these
power corrupts,
corrupting moments. Exactly.
People say that.
Power corrupts. And now Tao has been given a lot of power, so we'll see how it treats him. But in this book, it has not gone well for anyone else, so we'll see. I find it fascinating. To me, I love the power scaling. To me, that's the most brilliant part in the training. And the stakes in every match are so thoughtful to the end, right? All the matches, because sometimes you do like a Hunger Games situation where you're like, okay, she's not gonna lose right away, like there's no stakes here, but in this there's stakes at every moment, because it wasn't necessarily is he gonna win or lose, and he loses a lot, it's just all about how he perseveres and how he loses himself in the pursuit, right, in the training, in his revenge. And yeah, it was just and there's just these fun action pieces along the way, and I love the visual of the dual wielding. Like, there's a lot of movies out there or books out there that should be made into like shows or movies. This would make a fantastic movie. Like,
you need a good budget.
You need big budget. I think a series would almost be too much. It would be a fantastic movie. Like, just show us.
I could see it on HBO.
I mean, you could see anything
not
on
a mini
HBO,
series,
right? But
no, I mean, but so I'm just thinking of these like, I just think of these moments where like the huge numbers of his scale like crash into the noble divisions because they have so many numbers. It's like, I don't know. I think that HBO could do that pretty well, but of course a movie
spinning his blades, in his hand and like approaching.
Well, I just think of him. I just think of him as such a berserker, and just like his hands almost like, just like his
General
arms,
Grievous,
just like
when he's got the lightsabers
and
he's just spinning them. Like, yeah, it's kind of like that.
Like, I just see him in my head. Like, it's very, I don't know, cinematic of him charging at people and his arms just.
But
like,
he's got almost this look of like apathy a lot of times on his face, right? We're just like, I'm like, this is just another moment, another fight. I've done about a million of these, and it just like,
I mean,
the passivity in which he will do some of these things is insane.
it's muscle memory when you've died like thousands, who knows how many times in East Yogo at this point, and you've spent it all just fighting demons.
Mhm.
It's like, I don't know, it's so natural to him. I think that it's going to
Great
be
visuals.
exciting. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think, yeah, it'd be a cool one. I don't know. You always hear about these books getting like, what was the word, optioned or
Yeah.
whatever.
Mhm. It's a long
I
process.
don't know. Have you
and
heard
it's-
anything about Rage of Dragons or seen anything?
haven't, but I haven't really done any research. I just think it's primed and ready, you know. I'm sure there's been talks plenty of times. It's just hard to find the right home a lot of times, you know, like to go even the best scripts to get made. But he's got a movie background, so he's got like a film background, so you think he'd be
You'd think you'd have some
more
connections
prepared,
or something.
maybe. Yeah, who knows? Who knows? But
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
certainly
there's some
deserving.
that, you know, we've talked about Joe Abercrombie's First Law a couple times already, but we've always talked about like absolutely love those books. I don't know how you would adapt them. Like, how do you adapt them while keeping the charm of the story and just like the voice that Joe Abercrombie presents in it? And that's another guy who has background in.
He was like a TV editor or something.
Yeah,
movie editor.
Yeah, TV editing, movie editing, something in that realm. But you just don't really see it, and you'd be worried if it was getting adapted. I totally see it with the Rage of Dragons. It's a perfect fit.
Mm-hmm. I see it 100%. You can get an A-lister in there, like a Michael B. Jordan type, but maybe someone younger.
Well, you need someone young to play Tao. I don't know. I mean, they age people up all the time for these things, but I think it's like critical to his story that he's still young enough.
He needs to be young and ignorant enough to get his dad killed by running his mouth, you know? Because that's a big part of it.
Yeah, there's that, and also there's something better about the getting revenge for your dad plot when you're still young enough to like be primarily dependent on your dad.
Yeah, yes, that's well said. Or it's like, come here, like, son, let's do some training today. It's like, don't skip on your training. It'd be weird if he was like 30.
Right. I don't know. Find some good young actor.
Just pick someone new, a young up and comer, you know? Like,
well, that's always, it's another conversation, but I've always felt like the best sci-fi and fantasy like movies and things like that are
like the Star Wars cast.
made with a mostly new cast, or at least like relatively new people in the role of like the protagonist, because you don't want to be, when you're trying to go to a whole new world, you don't want to be looking at the person and being like, oh, that's Nicolas Cage. Like, you want to be obviously if they cast Nicolas Cage, just
movies, and
right,
he's obviously
exactly.
never gonna get like embarrassed or like defeated because he's The Rock. So
right, there's all these movies where that's
such a
the thing,
bad
right?
choice.
You watch
Could
the
you
movie.
Imagine? It's like The Rage of Dragons starring The Rock. The Rock is Tao. It's just like a
The
Fast
Rock
and
could be his
Furious
dad.
movie. That would be funny, but there's no way.
Yeah,
like The Rock would agree
too
to
small
that.
a role.
Yeah, too small.
You'd have
a
to.
role,
Well,
and he
The
doesn't
Rock
get
could
defeated.
be. The Rock could. Yeah, true. I mean, but
I think that was an issue with Black Adam, where he like was like, I need to be the star. Like, I can't get like defeated, like this and that. Like,
really?
Yeah, I think
he
that
has
was
a thing
part
about
of it.
that.
Yeah, I think like
that's kind of lame.
I think he like upset the Shazam guy because like he basically, because I guess they're both like, those two characters are intertwined in the DC universe, but like The Rock was like, no, it's all about me. And you know, like that kind of stuff.
That's kind of lame. I like The Rock, but I was thinking he could be Dejen. How do you say that name? Dejen, the guy who dies at the end, who's like going berserk and is just a total beast. But you know who's probably better for that? Batista.
Oh yeah, he would be cool.
He'd be good.
He'd be a good villain. I think he's trying to get out of the typecast of the berserker, though. I think I read an interview where he was like, I want people to see me as an actor. And he did that.
He
did that movie.
I just
that
watched
Shyamalan movie.
Not yet, like A Knock at the Cabin or whatever. I watched that movie. Good? Yeah. It was one of the best like Shyamalan films I've seen in a while.
Because it seemed interesting.
I mean, I don't know if that's high
Shyamalan
praise.
And I was like, no way, I'm watching that. Like that guy's taking enough of my time.
It's better. Yeah, I totally understand that. I don't know. It just came on some streaming service and it was right there, and I was like, you know what? I'll throw it on. And if it doesn't keep my attention, I'll go do something else. But it kept my attention. It's not bad. Look, I'm not going to tell you got to go out and watch it right now. But as these Shyamalan movies go, I mean, he totally like lost me with. You remember The Happening? This is way back. Mark Wahlberg.
I don't think I watched that.
Okay, I'm about to spoil it. So this episode's basically over. So if you don't want The Happening,
2008.
2008. I was just gonna say that.
Oh,
I was just gonna say that.
You were saying it. Yeah, I'll give that to you.
I did. You could probably hear in the podcast me be like, but anyway, I was gonna say that. If you don't want a 2008 Shyamalan movie spoiled for you, then you've had plenty of time to skip ahead at this point, or you've tried skipping ahead. I'm still in the preamble and haven't talked about it yet. Anyway, it's just like the plants were like randomly killing everyone as a way of like getting revenge for like deforestation or something.
Oh, that's horrible.
It's so stupid.
That's so bad.
I don't know if it was like, it's just, so The Happening is a really interesting like premise, which Shyamalan's great at.
What a horrible
is the premises.
concept.
Yeah, so like people are just
I get
like
what they were going
the way
for,
that it works.
Like H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds kind of thing, but still, that's bad.
The way it works is people just start like dying in mass numbers by suicide. And it's like, why are people doing that? And it's clear that they're basically being like controlled in some way, like to be forced to do this. Mm-hmm. And then Mark Wahlberg and the crew end up finding out that it was the plants taking revenge. So I don't know if it was just like deforestation but it was generally like, you're not treating the earth well and the plants are mad. So that was the big twist.
But you know what? It is exactly 1 hour and 31 minutes long. So right in there.
You know what? We found a movie that was...
Zoe Deschanel is his wife in the movie? Whoa.
Oh, I forgot that.
Wow.
So that's probably before 500 Days of Summer, too.
I mean, it was after, like, Elf.
I think 500 Days of Summer
2003.
2009 or something.
500 Days is 2009. You're right. Yep. It is.
Oh, hey,
there you go.
What am I supposed to do with this talent that I have? Charles, like naming.
Supposed to, wrap up a podcast about the Rage of Dragons.
All right, let's do that.
But yeah,
I don't really know how to transition to that. But you know what? Batista would make a Batista. You know what? Okay, last thing, because this is why we got on the tangent. Batista does play a more like actor, capital A actor role in
and I think that was
he's not like
he was being interviewed for press for that movie, and and he specifically said like, this is a great opportunity for me because I don't want to be typecast as the brute. I want to be an actor. And I guess this was him getting to act a little bit more, not so much.
He does, and he
people.
does a good job. He does a good job, and it's good. It's. I mean,
he's always
totally
good, like Guardians of the Galaxy. Like he's good in those, just as an actor. I mean, he plays.
But that's what he wants to get away from.
Yeah.
Is just like this comic relief.
His acting chops shine through. I haven't seen. I heard the third one's good, but I just can't be going to Marvel movies anymore. Like,
that's one I'll make an exception for.
I heard it was good though. I heard that it's James Gunn's Marvel swan song, and that it was actually like a nice, visually interesting movie. Which I'm like, okay, well that I can sit through, but
Yes. But can you, listener, sit through another minute of us talking about things that aren't to do with the Rage of Dragons at all? I think not. So it's probably time for us to have our swan song, which is the outro music.
Well said, Dylan. Just on a parting note, I was genuinely, going into this with high expectations. Even then, I didn't think I would like it as much as I did. I was like, oh, it's super popular. These super popular books sometimes kind of, they hit a nerve for people and they like it. I don't know
and they can disappoint because you're so, like, the hype is so big. And then you go to read it and you're like, this is what everyone was, so pumped about?
I was very, very impressed in a lot of ways. Like, it's so well written and, like, the reading experience, the setup and payoff, the character development, the development of the themes, both of revenge and power and classism and racism, and it's like all through one point of view, for the most part, very well done. So that's just my parting kind words. I didn't want to do Evan Winter dirty with all that rambling, although I love to ramble. Don't get me wrong. Now I'm thinking if I should go to the movies. I haven't been to the theater in months. But I don't know. We'll see. Will I see Guardians of the Galaxy 3? That remains to be seen.
Stay tuned.
It remains to be seen. Much like me in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
Well, I'll just double down on what you said about how great the book is. I agree with all the things Charles said. And I think that it'll be probably not too long, I think, before we dive into Fires of Vengeance. Sometimes we have pretty long breaks in between books 1 and 2 because we're trying to read a bunch of different stuff. But I think, we've got the bug at this point. So I imagine
we're reading the book that wouldn't burn. Then we can do the Fire of Vengeance. And it would get like this theme going of book titles that have to deal with fire in some way,
Oh, well, aren't we also reading the Battle Drum, which is the Ending Fire trilogy?
We sure are, Dylan.
That's Sarah El Arifi's follow-up to The Final Strife, which comes out pretty soon from when this podcast podcast episode
let's see, the
releases.
Battle Drum, when does that come out? It's like early May. I want to say it's out already. Oh no, May 23rd. Okay,
mid-May.
So we got some time. You still got a week or two before it comes out. So be on the lookout.
Well, Charles, you finished it already, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm in the process.
We've got a week before we are going to talk about it.
Yeah. All right, I'll be done. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah,
it's a great book.
No, it's great.
Looking forward to chatting about more fire themed books
and some interesting parallels too, because it's like this similar although I would say like Battle Drum is more inspired by like Ghanaian roots in the setting, whereas Rage of Dragons is like a full on like an African setting, but there's like Middle Eastern and African for Sarah. But it's kind of interesting to see the parallels there. Two great young voices in the fantasy genre whose best work is still ahead of them, The future of fantasy is bright.
Well said, Charles.
So can we play the outro
But the future of this episode is us playing the outro music and then leaving.
Well said. So I'm just going to get that outro music pumping so we can leave.
We were so focused. I feel like we're really good for
we are good. And just like you guys are so good for listening. Thank you all so much for coming on and listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, if you want to support us, one of the best ways to do that is giving us a little follow over on the socials. That's at the FTF Podcast.
A little follow
on Instagram. Just a cheeky little follow on Instagram at the FTF Podcast and Twitter at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more than just that cheeky little follow over on Twitter, what can they do?
toss us a cheeky little 5 star.
Ain't nothing cheeky about the 5 stars, baby. That's the mother load.
That's the mother load. You can do that over on Spotify now, which is where most of you are listening. It's just 2 clicks over at the top of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed, and it helps us a ton when you do that. We really appreciate it. You can also rate and or review on Apple Podcasts. You can write us a review that just talks about whether or not Charles should go see Guardians of the Galaxy 3. As long as you give us 5 stars, you can ramble about whatever you want in that review. We don't care. It's nice if you say something really nice about the show. But yeah, 5 stars. That'll do.
That'll do.
Anyway, I got a little lost in that one, but I'll send it back to you, Charles, because just listening is more than enough, and we have to say that also.
Of course, because just listening is more than enough. You guys are awesome for getting all the way to the end here. Thank you so much for that. We always enjoy this, and thank you for listening. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.